Top 10 infectious diseases man has triumphed over. In the midst of a worldwide episode, it is anything but difficult to overlook that humankind has triumphed over numerous ailments that used to obliterate whole nations. Today, inoculations are assessed to spare 3 million individuals from death consistently over the globe. Hardly any ailments have even been annihilated, gone everlastingly, with much more wiped out gone from whole nations or areas. In spite of the fact that we have far to go, it is encouraging to think back on where we've been. Here are 10 of the best triumphs of present-day science over microscopic organisms, infections, and parasites. 10. Smallpox. Smallpox was an airborne infection that executed approximately 33% of the individuals who contracted it. There is no fix, so specialists just held up around 14 days to check whether the patients kicked the bucket. On the off chance that they were sufficiently fortunate to endure, they were for all time scarred from the notorious red pustules that give the malady its name. In 1796, a British doctor named Edward Jenner saw that individuals who had cowpox when they were more youthful never appeared to get smallpox. To test this hypothesis, he infused the 8-year-old child of his plant specialist with cowpox before presenting the child to the savage smallpox infection. Shockingly, it worked. Jenner had unearthed the world's first vaccine. His disclosure essentially diminished the quantity of passings from the sickness. When the World Health Organization, WHO, declared its arrangement to annihilate smallpox in 1959, the sickness was confined to South America, Africa, and Southeast Asia. WHO requested enormous measures of immunizations and trained neighborhood governments on the best way to control them. In 1977, the last recorded instance of smallpox was found in Somalia. Subsequently, WHO authoritatively reported in 1980 that smallpox was the primary infection ever to be annihilated by human mediation. 9. Rinderpest. Rinderpest, otherwise known as dairy cattle plague, didn't take people, however, was all the while pulverizing. During the 1890s, a flare-up murdered 90% of all cows in sub-Saharan Africa. The individuals who relied upon these animals for meat, milk, and farm work starved to death. The number of inhabitants in influenced regions was diminished by at any rate 1/3. Any creature that endured the ailment could never get rinderpest again. Additionally, the high demise rate implied that wild creatures, for example, bison or giraffes, with rinderpest were cleared out before they could pass the infection to local cattle. In the 1960s, a British researcher named Walter Plowright built up an antibody, which the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization began purchasing in mass during the 1990s. A large number of veterinarians across Europe, Asia, and Africa took an interest in immunizing steers, lastly prevailing with regards to clearing out rinderpest in 2011. It is the subsequent sickness to be killed. 8. Polio. Polio, short for poliomyelitis, is an infection that incapacitates its casualty. In some cases, the loss of motion is brief. Different occasions, it causes perpetual incapacity. Most dire outcome imaginable, it spreads to the lungs and the patient dies. In 1953, Jonas Salk reported that he had built up an immunization for polio. He wouldn't patent his disclosures so as to get it to whatever number individuals as could be expected under the circumstances. Subsequently, he relinquished billions in the present US dollars. The March of Dimes subsidized a huge scope preliminary of the antibody before it was mass delivered for the US Open. In 1979, just 24 years after the immunization was officially presented, the United States was announced polio-free. To take out polio around the world, WHO made the Global Polio Eradication Initiative in 1988. Somewhere in the range of 1980 and 2016, there was a 99.99% decline in cases. At present, polio is just found in Afghanistan, Pakistan, and Nigeria. 7. Guinea worm. At the point when an individual beverages stale water defiled with guinea worm hatchlings, the worms venture out down to the digestive organs to mate. Following 10 14 months, the female worm relocates similar to the human foot. There, she makes an agonizing skin sore that drives the host to absorb his foot, a lake or stream, which discharges the hatchlings into the water. From that point, the cycle repeats. Despite the difficult source and the potential for bacterial contamination, guinea worm is once-in-a-while savage. Yet, when in doubt, individuals incline toward not to have worms repeating in their intestines. The Carter Center is driving the charge to utilize water decontamination to forestall the spread of guinea worm. Up until this point, it's been inconceivably effective. McGill University gauges that there were 3.5 million cases in 1986 all through South Asia, Yemen, and Sub-Saharan Africa. In 2018, there were 28 announced cases around the world. 6 yaws. Yaws, otherwise known as frambesia, is brought about by skin-to-skin contact with the bacterium Treponema pallidum pertineu. Inside a quarter of a year of being contaminated, the patient will create raspberry-like sores on his skin, particularly his face. These evaporate inside a half-year, just to eject again later and leave scarring. People being people, these scars can prompt tormenting and discrimination. In the 1950s, yaws was endemic in more than 70 nations. Since it is effectively restored with a solitary portion of the anti-infection azithromycin, it was one of the main ailments focused by WHO for destruction. Yaws was nearly cleared out during the 1960s, however smallpox got more consideration and intrigue fell in yaws. In 2019, yaws was as yet present in 15 nations. 5. Hookworm. Hookworms, which live in sewage-debased soil and enter through the patient's feet, make a trip up to the small digestive system where they drink their casualties' blood. From that point, they cause dormancy, iron deficiency, swelling, and hindered growth. As they live in territories with poor sewage treatment, the patient regularly craps them out and the hookworms end up in the ground once more. From that point, they find new feet to invade. In 1910, John D. Rockefeller Sr. given $1 million to kill hookworms in the American South. Following a 5-year crusade, contamination rates were fundamentally diminished. Far and away superior, more children were appearing at school and really focusing since they didn't have worms sapping their energy. Despite the close to end of hookworms, there is a high pace of reinfection and the worms can return. To overcome hookworms for the last time, the Human Hookworm Vaccine Initiative is making a medication that intrudes on the worm's capacity to eat. Before long, they may be away for acceptable. 4. Measles. Truly, this one has made somewhat of a rebound as of late in light of the fact that individuals haven't kept on immunizing against it. Be that as it may, all around, measles cases have been definitely diminished in the previous 50 years. Before 1963, pretty much every kid in the United States got measles before age 15. Significant scourges happen each 2-3 years, with a normal of 2.6 million passings consistently because of the ailment. It is gone through hacking and sneezing. In 1954, Dr. Thomas C. Peebles of Harvard University wiped out 11-year-old David Edmonston on the off chance that he needed to be of administration to humanity. David let the specialist swab his measles-tainted throat. Dr. John F. Enders had the option to detach the infection from his example and made the Edmonston-Enders antibody that is as yet utilized today. Between 2000 and 2018, measles passings dropped 73% on account of mass inoculation, sparing an expected 23.2 million individuals. Indeed, even in the United States where measles was wiped out in 2000, just 1,282 cases showed up in 2019. 3. Tetanus. Lockjaw is brought about by the bacterium Clostridium tetani, which lives in soils everywhere throughout the world. The microorganisms enter the body through an open injury, where they discharge a dangerous substance that causes loss of motion and agonizing muscle contractions. As C. tetani is impervious to synthetics and warmth, lockjaw is probably not going to be destroyed. Be that as it may, it very well may be wiped out, no new cases, through mass inoculation. Up until this point, endeavors have been unimaginably successful. In 1990, 314,000 individuals kicked the bucket of lockjaw around the world. In 2017, there were just 38,000 passings, that is 88% decline. The most elevated quantities of cases are in South Sudan and Somalia. 2. Elephantiasis. Elephantiasis is brought about by three types of thread-like worms that hold up in their casualties' lymphatic framework. This disturbs the body's capacity to manage fluids, which can make the contaminated appendages or private parts swell to elephant-like proportions. While the worms are in the lymph hubs, they discharge hatchlings into the circulatory system. In this way, if a mosquito nibbles somebody with elephantiasis, it passes the infection to the others it bites. Certain meds can be utilized to treat the ailment. Joined with safety measures against mosquitoes, this can stop the spread of the disease. Since 2000, at any rate 7.7 billion medications have been conveyed to an excess of 910 million individuals. 16 nations have disposed of elephantiasis, and 7 more are under reconnaissance to check whether they can make the rundown. 1. Malaria. Jungle fever is brought about by a little parasite in the blood that is spread by mosquitoes. Manifestations incorporate fever, chills, cerebral pain, queasiness, and body throbs. In spite of the fact that the malady keeps on contaminating individuals over the world, mankind has made tremendous jumps in fighting it. Malaria has been endemic in Europe, Africa, and Asia since days of yore. At the point when Europeans colonized North and South America, the ailment hitched a ride. Students of history gauge that, at the stature of the ailment, occupants across 53% of the world's landmass confronted the danger of contracting malaria. In the United States and Europe, the 1900s brought new understanding with respect to how intestinal sickness spread. Wetlands, where mosquitoes reproduced, were depleted or filled in. Bug sprays were mass showered. One association, the Office of Malaria Control in War Areas, later turned into the Centers for Disease Control. The 21st century has been amazingly beneficial in the battle against jungle fever. Somewhere in the range of 2000 and 2015, the quantity of jungle fever passings dropped from 840,000 every year to 440,000. The greater part of the individuals who passed on were youngsters in Africa,